Hi, time for another story. This is our second of the two fiction stories we're taking a look at in this section. And this one's called A Rose for Emily. And just like last time, stop, stop, stop. If you haven't read the story yet, stop watching this video. Go read, 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 read. Take notes if you need to. And come on back. All right, we're back. Hey, readers, how's it going? So, here's this story. This one's weird. And as I said in the last one, maybe you had a difficult time with this story. Some people do. The story is told in what we call non-linear fashion, meaning, again, it does not go from beginning, middle to end. It jumps around in time, flashbacks and flash forwards and all kinds of stuff. And it's all over the place. And in fact, when we're done getting through like some of the story elements, I kind of want to show you a revised timeline of this story just to see how it could have looked had Faulkner, William Faulkner, our author, had he written this story in the correct order, meaning the order that life really goes, meaning always forward and never backward. But I still think this is a great story, so if you had a hard time your first read, after we talk about it, maybe I'll explain some things that didn't catch with you, and go back and give it another read, or at least a glance through, and maybe some things will click a little bit better. Or maybe you nailed it the first read, who knows, but let's talk about it either way. So we got A Rose for Emily by the Southern author. Once again, we're going to the South, William Faulkner. This one's a couple decades earlier than the last one. This one's from 1930. And right away, we see a section marker here. This story begins with the Roman numeral 1, because there are actually 5 separate parts. My whole hand to get in there. Five separate parts to this story. And even within the parts, as I'll talk about later, it actually kind of gets divided up in terms of time. So each part, almost each part, kind of has like a point 1 and a point 2, like 1.1, 1.2, 2.21. He doesn't mark it that way, but you can tell because of what happens in terms of what's being described. And we know right away, within 5 words, that something is up with this story, because our main character, Miss Emily Grierson, is dead. How about that? You got a story within 5 words, the whole main character is gone, dead and gone. How interesting, right? So right away, you know Faulkner is going to be messing around with his storytelling technique here, because, well, something's up, right? So let's talk about this. There's lots of interesting stuff here. We're going to get basically the majority of a person's life in a short story. That's a hard thing to pull off. Most short stories take place over, well, a short amount of time. Short stories, right? Good Man is Hard to Find, as I explained, is a good example of that. That story takes place over about a day and a half of actual physical time. It doesn't jump around. It goes start, middle to end. This story tells most of Emily Grierson's life and even some things after her life. That is a lot to pack in, and obviously Faulkner can't cover every single aspect of her life because, well, again, there's not that many pages. This is not a novel. This is a short story. But he does get a lot in here, and there's a very interesting thing that happens in this story. What you don't realize when you start reading the story is that technically you're reading a murder mystery. But it's a murder mystery where the hints are given. There's plenty of foreshadowing in this story, and yet it doesn't come together really until the very, very end of the story when you realize, oh, that's what all that was about, right? So Faulkner is a master of foreshadowing in this story. He is dropping hints everywhere throughout. Something is weird, but you don't know why. You don't know why. Some of these things seem almost random, these stories that we'll get to as we go through here. But our main character herself is dead right away. It is her funeral, and this tells us everything really we need to know about who she is. These first couple of paragraphs. The whole town came to this woman's funeral. This was someone that everybody knew, everybody was connected to in some way, and they were all interested to go and see her final send-off, basically. It says the men threw a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument. That's an interesting way of describing someone, right? A fallen monument. The women mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in at least 10 years. So we're told that for at least a decade prior to her death, she's been holed up in this house. No one has seen the inside. She is reclusive. We're about to find out how she becomes so reclusive and why. but she is someone who's kind of an enigma. She is, yes, a curiosity. She is a fallen monument. We'll talk about what she may be a monument to. Um, but yeah, everyone wants to be at this event. Then we get this description here of Miss Emily's house. But Faulkner is being real sneaky here with this description. Yes, he is literally describing what Miss Emily Grierson's house looks like. It had once been white, meaning it no longer is, decorated with all these little things in the lightsome style of the 70s. That's 1870s, right? Not 1970s. It's 1930, right? But the present day came up, the 20th century came knocking. Garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august, meaning the well-respected and elder names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. So Faulkner is literally describing Miss Emily's house as this old, beautiful house that has fallen into disrepair and has stubbornly, as we see here, stayed while all the other old, beautiful houses have been torn down to make way for the future. Gas stations and things that were, futuristic in 1930, cotton wagons and cotton gins and stuff like that, that today are obviously almost 100 years old, but back then that was a new thing. Her house stuck around. Now, we got personification here. We talked about that in that video, right? A house, for instance, cannot be stubborn. A house is a house. No feelings, no emotions, no life, no nothing. But a person sure can. And I think, if you haven't figured it out, what he's doing here is he is doing double duty with this description. Yes, the house is all those things, but you know who else was? Miss Emily, right? Stubborn is the absolute best word to describe who this person is. She is staunch, stubborn, sticks to her everything, right? She plants her flag in the ground and holds it, as we're about to see through several little stories about her life. But she also has grown old and decayed, as we'll also see in her physical actual description pretty soon. She also was stubborn. She also stayed in that place and would not let anything change the way that she wanted to be. So this is a clever little bit of double duty here. I like this writing. This is really fun. But now Miss Emily has gone to the graves. Miss Emily alive had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a hereditary obligation upon the town. There's this story here in 1894. Colonel Sartoris, who was the mayor of the town when Miss Emily was young, we get this bit here about her father has passed away when she's quite young, and basically leaves her with everything. And because everyone felt bad, especially the mayor, that her father had left her alone, he came up with this story. It wasn't even actually true. That her father had basically helped out, loaned money to the town at one point, as we see here. And as a result of that, Miss Emily would be thereon never asked to pay any taxes to the city or town. The problem was that mayor, Colonel Sartoris, never put anything solid in writing on that. It seems like it was kind of a handshake deal, and when he and the people that knew him had gone away, passed away, whatever it may be, well, we'll see the results of that. But there's that story right there. Again, this first part here is again just after her death, basically. Oh, sorry, no, that's not true. This part right here is after her death with the funeral. But then we switch to this thing about the taxes, as I was just starting to say, right? The next generation became mayors and aldermen, and the arrangement, they either didn't want to adhere to it, or they just didn't know about it. So they started sending letters to Miss Emily and her, basically about paying her taxes, right? And she ignored them, because of course she did. Why wouldn't she? She was told by Colonel Sartoris, the mayor, you don't have to do this, right? Finally got to the degree where people had to come and knock on her door. Now this is Miss Emily much later in life, okay? You can see again the way that the house is described. The house is cracked and falling apart. Her servant man is also elderly. There's a lot of things that, the house does not appear to be in great condition. And as we see here, neither does Miss Emily. Now I'm going to read this. This is gruesome. but it is such amazing. Like, you're going to get such a picture in your head when you hear this, right? They rose when she entered. Miss Emily, here she comes, a small, fat woman in black, with a thin gold chain descending to her waist and vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. Her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that was why what would have been merely plumpness in another was obesity in her. She looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridges of her face, looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another while the visitors stated their errand. Can you see this in your head? What an amazing description. Here's this woman. She's very short and would be petite, but she has just kind of become so bloated. He even describes her almost like a corpse that has been floating in water for a while. It's such an amazing description. Her eyes look like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough. I mean, would you ever think to describe something like that? But what a visual that creates, right? Miss Emily is not anything pretty to look at, is what we're told here, basically, okay? And she is not a very friendly hostess. They come in and kind of stand in the doorway, and they tell her what they're there for, and her voice was dry and cold. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city records and satisfy yourselves. But we have. We are the city authorities, Miss Emily. Didn't you get a notice from the sheriff signed by him? I received a paper, yes, Miss Emily said. Perhaps he considers himself the sheriff. I have no taxes in Jefferson. But there's nothing on the books to show that. You see, we must go by See Colonel Sartoris. I have no taxes in Jefferson. But Miss Emily, see Colonel Sartoris, who had been dead for a decade. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Does Miss Emily pay her taxes? Miss Emily does not pay her taxes. She slams the door, and they basically just kind of give up on that pursuit. Well, not entirely. We are told later they would always kind of annually send a letter saying time to pay your taxes, but they never sent the sheriff after her. They never raised any, I don't think they ever came knocking on her door again after this. This is a great example of showing personality here. We are being shown, not told. We talked about showing versus telling, right? You're being shown right here what kind of person Miss Emily is. She doesn't welcome them in for tea. She doesn't have a smile on her face. She doesn't ask them how they're doing, how the weather is, how their children are. She has no time for these people, and she shuts them down immediately. She repeats herself very specifically. See, Colonel Sartoris, I have no taxes in Jefferson. Because there's nothing else for her to say. She does not want to see these people. She does not want them there. And she has her servant man show them the way out. That is Miss Emily right there. Stubborn, just like her house, right? And that ends part 1. So, okay, what's going on with Miss Emily? Nothing too crazy yet, right? So we're on to part 2. And now we go back 30 years in time. We are jumping around. He gives us the clues, though. He lets us know, hey, okay, remember that thing about the taxes we just talked about? Okay, go back 3 decades now. Because another thing happened 3 decades earlier with a whole other issue at her house. So, 2 years after her father's death, so this is just a short time after she's been, basically abandoned. She's all by herself. And a short time after her sweetheart, the one we believed would marry her, had deserted her. We'll come back to that. We haven't even heard anything about this yet. After her father's death, she went out very little. After her sweetheart went away, people hardly saw her at all. This is the beginning of her reclusive nature. This is where Miss Emily begins to shut herself away from the town, right? But there is a problem at Miss Emily's house. People are complaining there is a really strange smell coming from her house. Something is weird. And it's to the degree that they've gotten report after report, and they actually even hold like a meeting about it, a town meeting about it, to decide what the heck they're going to do about this. It's so bad. And they don't know what to do, right? Again, they're concerned about, Miss Emily being a lady, right? We talked a lot about that with the last story. Will you accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad? That's just not to be done, right? They couldn't do that. So what they do as a result of all this thing is in the middle of the night, cloak and dagger, they sneak into her basement, basically, and they sprinkle some lime, not like lime the fruit, but like lime, like the chemical, basically, and all around the outside, all over her place. It seems that there is a light, and they seem to see someone. It seems like Miss Emily is watching what they're doing. And it says after a week or two, the smell went away. Problem solved, right? What the heck is this story? This just seems, on a first read, you know what's happening. You know what's going on. You know what the smell is, right? We all read the story, right? It's Homer. It's Homer Barron, who we haven't even met yet. But it's his decaying body, right? But they think it's like an animal or something that has crawled into her basement and died, or who knows what. They certainly don't expect it to be a human body, and they certainly don't think that Miss Emily is involved directly with it at all, which is why they do all this sneaking around. But when you read this the first time, this little anecdote here about the weird smell and the reaction to it, it just seems so like, okay, why are you telling me this, right? But Faulkner's got a plan. He's putting it all together. He's laying out puzzle pieces all over the place for us to put together later, right? Okay, and that is when the people began to feel really sorry for her. This is when people really start chatting about her. Miss Emily is, again, a curiosity, as they say. She is the subject of much, much, much gossip. There is a lot to be said about Miss Emily. They want to chit-chat. They don't know her very well. She, again, is mostly a recluse, but everybody's got something to say about her, right? When her father died, it got about the house. That was all that was left to her, and in a way people were glad. At last they could pity Miss Emily. Being left alone and a pauper, she'd become humanized, right? Because her family once had a lot of money, and much of it was lost, and so all she is left with is this house. And so now this person has been brought down to their level. Then something weird happens. So this is, I think, about the earliest that we go in Miss Emily's life. In fact, it is. Miss Emily's father dies, and Miss Emily has a very unusual reaction to this. They come to the house to talk to her, but also they want to come to collect the body, which is still in the house. And Miss Emily says he's not dead. She told them her father was not dead. She did that for 3 days, with ministers calling on her, doctors trying to persuade her. Miss Emily says, my father has not died. This is our first clue into, well, I mean, you tell me. What do you think? Is Miss Emily crazy? She behaves in very strange ways. We can say that. Is she mad? Has she gone insane? I don't know. We know that she's stubborn. We know that she's unusual. We know that something has happened here. And this plays into it. This is the earliest information we get about Emily's life. We did not say she was crazy then. They all think she's crazy. Then they didn't, but now it seems they do. We believed she had to do that. We remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and we knew that with nothing left, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. So we hear in a very short bit of description here that it seems like Miss Emily was someone who young men used to be interested in, maybe because of the family's wealth, but maybe just because, well, she didn't always look like the way she was described earlier. We're going to get a new description of her later, when she was younger. So I guess an old description. Seems like her father had driven all these young suitors away, young men coming knocking on the door, hoping to date and to woo and to perhaps marry Miss Emily. He shushed them all away. And so Miss Emily now is, I believe, in her 30s, and at this age and this time, if you get to about that age, you're not worth as much, unfortunately, as a young woman. And so not too many men come knocking anymore now that her father's gone and now that she's quote-unquote too old, which, again, I know it's not that old, but times are what they are. And so then they said she would cling to that which had robbed her, that being her father, as people will. So maybe that's the beginning of her kind of losing it. Maybe she kind of started to lose her mind because of the way her father treated her. This is the most that we get of her kind of backstory to what happens here. Not a lot, but again, Faulkner's leaving it to us to put pieces together here, right? Okay, part 3, moving on. She was sick for a long time. When we saw her again, her hair was cut short, making her look like a girl with a vague resemblance to those angels. Now she looks like an angel, not like a bloated, submerged in water corpse, as we heard before, right? Sort of tragic and serene. And someone comes to town. So this is, again, the turn of the century, and all of the dirt roads are starting to get paved over for the buggies and eventually the automobiles that would come to town. And someone comes to town specifically, Homer Barron, a Yankee. Now, again, this story is written in 1930, so this word right here would carry a lot of weight as it would have in the time just post the Civil War when this main story takes place here. A Yankee, meaning someone up from the north, kind of like where we are, right? Um, Someone who was, he also is a fascination to the town. A big, dark, ready man with a big voice and eyes lighter than his face. The children would follow him around. Yes, I know there's a lot of not great language in here. Again, 1930, the South. Um, but he was someone that people started paying attention to, and sure enough, pretty soon he and Miss Emily start to kind of sounds like they're dating. Basically, they start seeing each other. So here's this guy who is an out of towner, not just out of towner though, someone from the north in the South, come to repave the South, literally repave the roads. Right? We'll come back to that. And so again, the town starts gossiping and talking. Miss Emily, oh my God, and Homer, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. She finally found somebody, but of course, not really a day laborer for her. She is someone of a higher, again, noblesse oblige, meaning someone who is of a higher class, having to stay with people of that same class. But here she is in a position where she can't really be that choosy. And so she starts going around with a guy who works with his hands, who normally wouldn't have been the kind of person that she or her ilk would have gone for. And yet here it is, right? So again, they start saying, poor Emily, right? They pity her that she has to lower herself to this degree. But she has dignity about it. She carries it well. And that's what's going on. Okay? So that's basically part 1 of part 3. Miss Emily and Homer dating. Great. Part 2 comes a little bit later, and again we get another little story about Miss Emily that is just kind of random. What the heck is going on? Miss Emily goes to the pharmacist, basically. The druggist is what they're called. She was over 30 then. Still a slight woman. Okay, now listen to this description. Very different than what we heard. Still a slight woman, though thinner than usual, with cold, haughty black eyes and a face the flesh of which was strained across the temples and about the eye sockets as you imagine a lighthouse keeper's face ought to look. What happened to the coal pressed into the dough? She's not there yet, so now her face is almost stretched. She's so skinny and slight. This is a major transformation for Miss Emily that we see take place here, right? And Miss Emily is there because she wants one thing and one thing only. I want some poison, she said. Yes, Miss Emily. What kind? For rats and such? I'd reckon I want the best you have. I don't care what kind. The druggist named several. They'll kill anything up to an elephant. But what you want is arsenic, Miss Emily said. Is that a good one? Is arsenic? Yes, ma'am, but what you want? I want arsenic. The druggist looked down at her. She looked back at him, erect, her face like a strained flag. Why, of course, the druggist said, if that's what you want, but the law requires you to tell what you're going to use it for. Miss Emily just stared at him, her head tilted back in order to look him eye for eye, until he looked away and went and got the arsenic and wrapped it up. The Negro delivery boy brought her the package. The druggist didn't come back. When she opened the package at home, there was, written on the box under the skull and bones, for rats. Okay, so again, at face value, the first time you read this, we just get like a random, totally random story that one day Miss Emily had a problem with rats and wanted to buy some poison. She wants to get some pretty hardcore poison. Arsenic for rats, it's pretty hardcore, right? But that's it. We're just like, all right, I guess so. What are you doing, Faulkner? But now, right, you know, right? What was the arsenic for? She was going to poison and kill Homer Barron. So clearly, in between part 1 of section 3 and part 2, things have gone wrong between herself and Homer Barron, and she has come up with a pretty over-the-top solution for her problems with him to keep him at her side, basically, right? But we don't know that at this point. But this is also a great example of the power that Miss Emily has in this town. Miss Emily gets whatever, think about it, Miss Emily gets everything she wants in this story. By hook or by crook. Maybe not the way she wants it, but she ends up getting everything she wants. She gets away with everything. She manipulates however she needs to. It's not even really manipulation. It seems to almost be intimidation. Miss Emily just stared at him until he looked away. He's like, Miss Emily, you buy arsenic, we gotta know what it's for. I don't know if it's true or not, but he's kind of like, I don't think I should be giving arsenic to somebody. Oh my God. But she just stares him down until he finally just backs down. He doesn't even come back out. He very passive aggressively gives the box to his delivery boy, and when she gets home, also passive aggressively is written on the box, "for rats," as if to say, like, look, lady, I told you what this was for. If you use it for something else, it's not on my hands. I told you this was for rats. It's not going to be used for rats. You know it and I know it, but we don't quite know it just yet there. All right, we're turning the corner. Part 4. And so the next day, it sounds like that pharmacist guy probably went and started chatting it up. Maybe he went to the local saloon or the post office and started saying, Miss Emily, she bought some arsenic. And so, of course, everyone thinks she's going to use it on herself. And so the next day, we all said she will kill herself. And we said it would be the best thing. So again, they're not nice to her. No one is kind about Miss Emily. They're all just curious about, like, almost like she's a circus animal or something, right? But they think that's what's going on. More gossip. And the reason was, again, well, they started saying they thought that she would marry him. And then there's this interesting detail here. Now, again, this story is written in 1930. I don't know if Faulkner is actually hinting at something here, but it does say this. Homer himself had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club. He was not a marrying man. Now, is Faulkner suggesting that Homer Barron is gay? Possibly. He liked men could mean that. It could just mean that he's just a bachelor, a playboy. He's not the kind of guy who wants to settle down and get married. It's not clear. It doesn't matter, because the end result is Homer Barron is not a marrying man, no matter what his reasons are. Miss Emily wants a marrying man. She wants to get married. She wants to be settled down. She wants to have all that set up. She's not looking just to play around, but it sounds like Homer is. All said, though, Miss Emily begins to prepare for a marriage all the same. She gets her family involved. She goes to the jewelers and gets a toilet set in silver with the letters HB, Homer Barron, on each piece. She bought a complete set of men's clothing, a nightshirt, and she's buying stuff for him, like as if they either are or are about to get married. And so now they thought, well, they are married, right? No one's going to ask her. No one ever asks Miss Emily what's going on. Well, she probably wouldn't tell them anyway. But again, gossip is the only way that people know about who she is, right? We were glad. We were glad because the two female cousins were even more gruesome than Miss Emily had ever been. So we were not surprised when Homer Barron, the streets had been finished for some time. So Homer Barron's still in town, even though the work is done. He was gone. They thought maybe, he'd gone off to prepare for her, but it says there was no public blowing off. There was no fight in the streets. No one ever heard anything. And sure enough, after a week, her family departs, and as we expected all along, within 3 days, Homer Barron was back in town. A neighbor saw the Negro man admit him at the kitchen door at dusk one evening, and that was the last we saw of Homer Barron. End of Miss Emily for some time. Now, I want to very quickly kind of digress and talk about the point of view of this story. Who's telling this story? Who's our narrator? Have you paid attention to the pronouns that are being used? We. It's always we. This story is told from the point of view of the townspeople, right? This is kind of a collective remembrance of Miss Emily. We. It never says I. My name's Steve, and I live in this small town, and let me tell you about this lady that lives there. It's always we the people. And as I've pointed out a few times, and as is very clear, this story is told very unreliably. Okay? It's observational, right? They can't get into Miss Emily's head, so, right? So all they're doing is that third person point of view, but all they can do is observe and see what she is doing and saying, but nothing else, right? Our narrator doesn't have any omniscient powers. And to that degree, that means that this story is being quote-unquote written after the events of the story, which means after part 5 when they discover what's really going on. And so, what Faulkner is doing here through his narrator is lying to you. Because that is not the last that they see of Homer Barron. That's the last they see of Homer Barron alive, standing and breathing. But we all know, having finished this story, that they are about to see Homer Barron one more time, in fact, or at least what's left of him. But here's the thing. If it said that was the last we saw of Homer Baron, well, alive anyway. We saw his corpse later, but let me get to that. That would ruin the surprise, right? We are also told, let me scroll back up. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Here's another lie. After her sweetheart, that's Homer Baron, had deserted her. Well, in a roundabout way, I suppose he did. Or he was going to. But did he desert her? No. We know that he didn't because she murders him and keeps him there. Right? So, again, there are some very kind of sneaky little lies that are planted throughout the narration in this story to misdirect us, to guide us down one path, and then hit us with something else later. Sneaky stuff, right? But these are little choices that a storyteller has to do, right? Okay. Where are we? Here we are. Okay, and now we basically get the end of Miss Emily's life. That's the end of part 4. She gets older. Everyone sees her every once in a while. For 6 months, she didn't appear on the streets. Again, she has her servant man to go and collect groceries and things for her. She never has to go anywhere. She does give china painting lessons for a little while to, I guess, some people in town. But she, just kind of disappeared. At one point, it said that the top part of her home gets closed off. I'm not totally sure how they knew all these things directly. Maybe the servant guy was telling people some stuff. I don't know. There are some things in here that are unusual as far as like how would these townspeople know these facts. I'll get to another big one in a minute. She fitted a studio in one of the downstairs rooms. Her servant grew grayer. She was growing grayer. Every December we sent her a tax notice, which she didn't pay any attention to. She evidently had shut up the top floor of her house. She gets older, she gets bigger, she starts turning into the creature that we see described in the beginning of the story, and then she died. She got sick, didn't go to the doctor. Her house is filled with dust and shadows, with only the man to wait for her. We didn't even know she was sick. We had long since given up trying to get information from her servant. So again, it sounds like he's not talking either. He talked to no one, probably not even to her. She died in one of the downstairs rooms in a heavy walnut bed with her curtain, her gray head propped on a yellow pillow yellow with moldy and aged with lack of sunlight. Okay, now most stories right here, this is the end of part 4, would say what? What 2 words would pop up right here at the bottom of this page? The end, right? Your main character died. Where are you going to go from there? But Faulkner, and if the story does end right here, do you like this story? This is a terrible story. It's like, what is this random crap about this crazy lady? Why did you tell me any of this stuff? Who cares? And Faulkner's like, okay, you ready? Part 5. So, the people said that they waited until she was like properly in the ground, dead and buried, before they were like, all right, what's going on? What is going on? She's got no family that's going to come and claim anything. We're going to get into this house and we're ready. Almost like a mob with pitchforks in a way. They're not angry at her. They're just so overwhelmingly curious. They've got to get in there. And so the servant meets them, lets them in, and then he poofs off. He never comes back again. And he knows. It's not like he doesn't know what they're about to find. So he's like, I'm out. And they never see him again. He was not seen again. 2 female cousins came at once. They brought flowers, stuff like that. But again, they said they waited, and they got in there. And it says, okay, now here's the thing. I don't really know how they know this. Already we knew that there was one room in the region above stairs which no one had seen in 40 years and which would have to be forced. How do they know this? This is the only big question mark I have about this story. If you got an answer to this, I'm all ears. I've been asking this question for a long time now, and I don't know if anybody's solved it. If you solve it, great. I mean, there's any number of ways you could, in a fictional story, work out how they could have figured this out, but it's never really given. But somehow these townspeople know that there's a room upstairs which has been shut off for a while that in 40 years has never been opened, and they would have to force it open. I don't know how they know this, but it doesn't matter. They waited until she was decently in the ground before they opened it. Here we go. They literally break the door down, and they find this room. And listen to the way that Faulkner drips these details along. A thin, acrid pall, as of the tomb. The tomb, because it literally is, you're about to find out, a tomb, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal, for a wedding. Upon the valance curtains of faded rose color, upon the rose-shaded lights, upon the dressing table, upon the delicate array of crystal and the man's toilet things backed with tarnished silver, silver so tarnished that the monogram, which we were told was HB, was obscured. There's dust on everything. Among them lay a collar and tie, as if they had just been removed, which lifted left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded, beneath it the 2 mute shoes and the discarded socks. Everything is ready to go for this wedding. But the wedding never happened. Why? Because the man himself lay in the bed. That's the last detail that we're given about this room. Now, again, he's milking this for dramatic effect. Imagine you are one of those people and you break into this room and there is a rotted corpse in the bed in the middle of the room. Would you be like, oh my gosh, look at all the dust everywhere. When you look at this, you just like everything's so dust. That would be like the last thing you notice. You would notice the body first. But Faulkner, he saves it for the end to finally stick it in. And now finally, all of everything comes together. Homer did not disappear. It sounds like she probably told him that she wanted to get married. He said no. She tried to force it. She bought all the stuff. He came back to town, probably to blow her off finally. Maybe she gave him some special tea, and he dies. Because she was not going to lose another man, right? Every man that had come into her life, including her father, had deserted her. She is not going to be deserted again. So she keeps him. What was the weird smell? That happens not too long after he disappears, right? Of course, it was his rotting corpse up in this room. It wasn't in the basement. They couldn't tell. What was the poison for? Of course, that was to murder him. All these things, okay? And we finally get, again, that there has been a murder mystery this whole time, but you didn't know that there was even a murder until basically the very end of this story. The body, okay, and it gets weirder. He's not done. They looked down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, a hug. But now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded at him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay. It was so rotted he was one with the bed. Ugh. And upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of patient biting dust. And then finally, here's the detail. Then we noticed that in the second pillow next to the dead body was the indentation of a head. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron-gray hair. Did you get that detail? Let's scroll up just a little bit. It was Emily's hair, which we were told earlier in this part right here. After Homer Barron disappears, not long later, her hair starts to turn gray. She was shacking up next to this dead body. She would sleep next to the corpse every night. That's my dog, sorry. To the degree that she was there for years while her hair turned iron gray. Oh boy. Yeah, that's what was going on. So not only is it a murder mystery, it's a super creeper mystery. Holy cow. Things are wild, things are crazy here in Emily Grusin world. Okay, so let's talk about this. What's going on here? I mean, yeah, we get a lot happening here, but I think we can also look at the story symbolically. We can look at it metaphorically. We can look at this even as what is referred to as an allegory. An allegory is a story where basically all of the elements of the story are working symbolically together. And I think that's kind of the case here, because, well, here's the deal. Think about, okay, so A Rose for Emily is the title of the story, right? First off, a rose is like a dedication in this case, I think. It's like the story is them paying tribute to this person, Emily. The story itself is the rose, okay? Think about when the story takes place. Think about when it's written, 1930, right? So again, in the South, think about, okay, so we're only in 1930, we're only about 65 years out, a generation essentially, or two, a generation and a half away from the Civil War, right? Remember that Colonel Sartoris was the mayor in 1894. Colonel, he was a colonel in the Civil War, right? In the Civil War, post-Civil War was the period called the Reconstruction, when the South was basically, well, being paved over, which is kind of what Homer Barron came to do. Homer Barron, a Yankee from the North, the Yankees who won the Civil War. Miss Emily is very much a representation of the Old South. Everyone else is the New South. That's kind of similar to the grandmother and the mother in a way in Good Man is Hard to Find, but that's a separate thing. Miss Emily is this stubborn and coquettish thing who stays in her stubborn and coquettish house, not letting anything new come and take it over. She is stubborn to the end and gets away with everything, right? Even murder, even though no one knew there was a murder that she had gotten away with. In a lot of ways, I think Miss Emily is meant to be a representation. And again, challenge me on this if you like. Symbols are always open for interpretation, as we said, but I think she's meant to be a representation of the Old South, the old ways, the way that ladies would act. You don't question a lady. You don't, second guess a lady. You let a lady be, and you respect her. And that's kind of what the town does. I mean, they gossip the hell about her, right? But that's behind her back. Homer Barron comes in, the man from the North, to literally, as I said, literally pave over the past. Not just figuratively, he does that actually as his job. He is a street paver. He is paving over history with something new coming from the North after the North has won the war. And what does the represent? So he's the representation of what is new in the South. And in the story, what does the Old South representative do to the New South? She kills him, right? Because she couldn't handle that thing that was going to be taken away from her again. And that's what happens in this story. Now, is that what Faulkner is doing? I think there's some great evidence for that throughout the story. Or this could just be a story about, this crazy lady who does some wild things, and isn't it fun that there's a murder mystery and now you can go back and put it all together? Sure, that's another way of doing it, right? But I think this is a really interesting story style choice, and playing with linear time, playing with how your story elements are revealed, playing with foreshadowing, like the poison, like the smell. Those are huge foreshadowing points that Faulkner puts in here as we get to the end, and we finally get it all together with one sentence, which solves everything. All those questions that you may have had throughout this entire story, right? So as I said, I actually put together, this isn't official by any means, but I thought this worked. Here's the actual quote-unquote real timeline, at least as far as I have seen. And like I said, you have to break all except for part 5 into 2 parts, which Faulkner does, so I'm not inventing that. There's definitely parts that, while they're not demarcated with like a number on the page the way he does with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's clear, like, here's a story and here's another story within. So if you were to break Miss Emily apart and put it back into an actual timeline, here's what I got. So you start with 2.2. This is the earliest we go in the story. Emily is a young adult, her father driving the young men away, and her father's death, her strange reaction to it. That's the earliest we go. We don't get anything younger. We don't get Emily as a little girl. That's the soonest that we hear about what's going on with her. That goes straight into the very next section, which is 3.1, when her father has died and Homer Barron comes to town. They start being seen together. 4.1 is now, so this is the next section, but skipping over 3.2. 4.1, there's some drama with Homer. Maybe they're going to be together, maybe not. He shows up, he disappears, and that was the last we saw of Homer Barron, right? Okay. Sort of kind of in between there, I guess, like right about there, technically, I guess, in between these two, would be 3.2, where the poison story. Miss Emily goes to buy some poison, and we don't know why. And then, yeah, obviously Homer disappears after that, but you get what I'm saying here. 2.1 would be when the strange smell suddenly happens at her house. This is after the poisoning, so the death has occurred. The smell is the rotting corpse. Now, you kind of have to combine these two because they're both sort of taking place simultaneously. So 1.2 is when the taxmen come to the door, right? And that takes place during her older life, which is what 4.2 describes. When Emily gets older, more reclusive, she dies, somewhere in there, that's when the taxmen come. So I combined those two. 1.1 is the very beginning of the story, when Miss Emily Grierson died. The whole town came to the funeral, right? And then 5 all by itself, of course, is everything after her death, after the funeral, breaking into the house, and the discovery, of course, of the body and all that entails. So, look at this. 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 4, 1, 5. Wow, that is jumping like crazy. What an interesting idea. Now, I can almost guarantee Faulkner would have had to have planned this out in good detail before he sat down to write this. And you might want to do the same thing. We'll talk about this later, but planning out and plotting out your story, even if it's just like some bullet points, like the main hits, exposition, crisis points, climax, exposition, kind of, or resolution. That can be nice to have, kind of like a roadmap. Roadmap. If you've ever done an outline when you've written like a composition essay, an essay for like a comp class or something like that, or any other class, an outline, I always tell my students, is one of your best friends, because again, it's almost like a GPS that you can follow, like a map, making sure that you cover all the points you want to cover, all the things you want to say, and in the order that you want them to go, instead of trying to just figure that out off the top of your head as you're staring at a computer screen typing away. That's hard to do. And that's hard to do even if it's something that comes from your imagination, like a short story. So, you might want to plot out, how is your story going to go? What are the main beats? What is it that you want to accomplish, right? At what point do you want things like, revelations to be made? At what point do you want there to be a climax? At what point does your character go through the things that they're going to go through and how they're going to change and stuff like that? And then, yeah, of course, you're going to fill in all the rest of the fun stuff, the dialogue and the description and all that lovely stuff that you get to do as a writer. But having that framework to build around can be very, very helpful. Everybody has a different process though, so I'm not going to say you must do this. But if you don't do that, or you haven't done that, or have never tried to do that when writing a short story, I highly recommend trying that out as you start moving towards, well, guess what? That's what you're heading towards, is writing your own short story. So those are the two sample stories we have talked about now. Hopefully you liked them. If you not, then I'm sorry. If you did, well, great. If you didn't, you know what? There's all kinds of other great short stories, and if you want some suggestions for more, just reach out to me. I would love to do nothing but talk about short stories all day long, but this isn't a short story class, it's a writing class, and we only have so much time for that stuff. So I would love to hear what you think about this story. Again, you're welcome optionally to jump on our discussion board and chat away and tell me whatever you thought was going on. But again, if there's anything in this story, switch back to the story. If there's anything in this story that you thought was just really cool, any interesting writing, any cool description, just anything that you want to say, wow, when this happened, I was really interested, or I hated when he did this. You can talk about the stuff you didn't like either. That's okay. I'm not expecting all of you to love these stories or even enjoy them. Everyone has different tastes, and that's okay. So if there's anything you really didn't like that Faulkner or O'Connor did in her story, you're welcome to chat about those as well. I'm always all ears. I don't take it personally. I didn't write these stories. I just picked them for us to talk about. So, okay. Up next are going to be some instructions on how to do some cool writing exercises. I'll probably do a video for those. If I do, it'll be very short. Or it may just be an email. I'll figure it out. We'll see. I'm still thinking about that. But they're going to be some fun exercises that you will complete, and they will be done on our online page, Blackboard or whatever in the future it may be called. Cool. Yeah, you good? Okay. I'll hear from you in the discussion boards. Bye.